ourselves. My name is Alicia Zamuda. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I work as the coordinator of alternative testing at the Student Disability Center.
Afternoon, everybody. My name is Nico. I am the coordinator of accessible text at the Student Disability Center, and I've been a professional staff within the office for about 8 years now. And prior to that, I was a student staff. Also, just a note, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to raise your hand or pop those in the chat, and we will try to be mindful of that. We'll also have time at the end for any questions.
So welcome, we're excited you're here, and we're looking forward to answering those and getting started. So a little bit about our presentation, what you're going to be hearing from us. We are going to be talking about what is disability, how many disabled students are at CSU, what's the history and background of thinking around disabilities, what is the accommodation process at CSU, what accommodations look like, and how do we work with you and you work with us to ensure that students have the accommodations they need for testing, but also how do you work with our office for students who need info in an accessible format. And then we're going to talk about service dogs and answer any questions that this presentation might have raised for you. So a little bit about disability. A question that we often ask when we first give this presentation is, what do you think of when you hear the term disabled? And then a lot of times we hear folks give us the feedback of, I think of someone in a wheelchair, or I think of someone who has a mobility disability, or who is visually impaired, or who is deaf. And I think, you know, we are seeing, especially now coming out of a pandemic, that there are a lot of other disabilities that are associated with the services that we provide, including mental health, learning disabilities, chronic health disabilities. We're just now starting to see the effects of long-term COVID and what that could possibly become and be part of a disability. So we just like to remind anyone we give this presentation to that it's not just those physical disabilities that are present and you see often, it's also those internal and invisible disabilities that we're supporting students with as well. We also like to say that disability is part of the human condition. So at any point, any of us can become part of the disabled community. We don't like to hope this on anyone, but at some point you might get in a car accident and you might become physically impaired or have a physical disability from here on out. And so at any point, we as individuals could become part of the disabled community. So we want to recognize that there's a lot of intersections that the disabled community is part of, and we want to recognize that as in our office, because a lot of folks are coming in with a lot of those different identities and holding a lot of different intersections when it comes to disability.
Yeah, and as Alicia mentioned, disability is one of the only minority populations that anyone at any time could become part of. Just some statistics about people with disabilities around the world. In the United States, there are almost 20% of the entire population, so that's almost 60 million people live with a disability. 1 in 4 people ages 65 to 69 years of age have a severe disability. And 3.6 million people within the United States use a wheelchair. And a little more specific to CSU, these are this is a breakdown of the population of students that we serve. So as we look to the fall 2021 fall semester, many of us have questions and uncertainty. What the SDC does know is that we have almost 2,500 students currently enrolled in fall courses that have a documented disability or medical condition. And about 10% of those are populations who have a immune compromising health condition or chronic health condition. And about 40% of those are students with mental health conditions. So as Alicia mentioned, those are invisible disabilities that aren't apparent. And of those 40%, 21.7% have anxiety, 7% have depression. And as you can see from this chart, a large majority of the students we serve have those invisible disabilities, and only a small percentage of those that we do serve are students with those physical disabilities or apparent disabilities.
So a little bit about the disability rights movement and timeline. We think this is really important to talk about because prior to the 1960s and the disability rights movement, disability was not discussed in the way it is now. So it was fueled by disabled vets who wanted to attend college on the GI Bill after World War II, but couldn't. And so they were fighting for the right to attend universities, attend colleges, and have access. And that continued to gain momentum during the civil rights movement of 1960, during the 1960s, which ultimately led to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And this was the first time that the US government had created a civil rights protection for folks with disabilities. It allowed programs receiving federal funding to not discriminate based on disability. So there could be no discrimination if someone was coming into a federally funded space if they had a disability. It also allowed for reasonable accommodation. So that accommodation process that we're going to talk about, it started putting that into place. It wasn't until 1990 that this was expanded with the Americans with Disabilities Act to cover all public and private entities as well. And then in 2008, that was amended. So the ADA Amendments Act of 2008 stated that the definition of disability should be interpreted in favor of broad coverage of individuals. So that really opened the door for all of those invisible disabilities that Nico and I have been presenting on so far, and really allowed that thought of what disability is to become more inclusive. A little bit about how disability was seen. There's a medical model of disability and a social model of disability, which is the next slide. But pre-504, the Rehabilitation Act, this was how disability was seen, the medical model. And a lot of places still, unfortunately, look at disability this way. It sees the problem with the individual and not the space. And so they're trying to change how the individual shows up to this space to cure or fix them. And medical care is the main issue. So it's really taking the individual and centering them as the problem instead of looking at everything around them as the issue. What we look at CSU, specifically in the SDC, is we try to base our office in a social model of disability. The social model of disability is the exact opposite. It's saying, no, there's nothing wrong with you. It's everything around you that is creating these barriers. So there's a picture here with a person and all the barriers around it, and that's very much how we see disability and disability accommodations are eliminating those barriers for our students in the environment. And so it's definitely much more focused on full participation and integration of individuals into society, not trying to fix the individual, but instead of getting equal access for them.
And we have a short little illustration video that demonstrates the difference between the medical and social model. So I'm going to play that. If you are unable to hear, please let us know. It also has captions available. So I'm going to go ahead and start that now. Is the video not playing for everybody?
Nico, it has stopped.
Okay,
It
I'll
was
go ahead and
playing
restart
and then it stopped.
Okay, yep, I think I stopped it because I saw that in the chat, but I'll go ahead and keep playing it. If you run into any issues, please let us know. But I'll keep playing it now. So I apologize if that didn't work for everybody, but it's just kind of an illustration of the social model and how it is the environment, how the environment is built is what keeps people with disabilities from accessing equitable access to their environment. And we'll provide a link to that video if you weren't able to view it. Alicia just popped that in the chat for those that would like that link. So moving on, what are accommodations? So accommodations, as we define them here at the Student Disability Center, are an adjustment to the educational environment to reduce barriers caused by the inherent inaccessibility of institutions. So again, that's the social model of disability. So the inherent inaccessibility of institutions not built by for those with disabilities. These accommodations provide equitable access to university life, housing, and coursework. Looking at the picture on the right side of the slide, it shows two scenarios, one entitled equality and another titled equity. In the equity picture, every one of the four individuals is given the same size bike to ride, although each rider is not able to enjoy the bike. In the equity picture, each rider is given a bike that suits their individual needs. In the SDC, we are committed to providing individual case-by-case solutions that fit individual needs, like in the equity picture below. And then we just have a quick, a little blurb from our accessibility policy, which states that the university must make reasonable accommodations as appropriate to remove any barriers that may exist for an individual with a disability. And again, accommodations don't give students an advantage. They're all held to the same standards as their non-disabled peers. They simply level the playing field of the learning environment that wasn't built with them in mind. So some of the services that we have at the at CSU, they include accommodations and advocacy. So that could be extra time for exams and quizzes and less distracting environments. And Alicia is the coordinator of the Alternative Testing Center, and she'll talk a little bit more in depth about that here in a bit. That could be assistance with note taking. So we have paid note takers for students, advocacy for housing assignments and attendance. We work closely with many offices on campus, so we build those connections with the students and those offices. And then also we work closely with the Assistive Technology Resource Center, so they provide assistive technology for students. They provide that software, and then they have apps for their personal devices as well.
So a little bit about the accommodation process at CSU. All students who are wanting to get accommodations for the upcoming semester or years are required to meet the same qualifications as any other student admitted to CSU. They must self-identify to the SDC, so we don't know that they are on campus unless they come and connect with us. And then from there, once they self-identify, we set them up with a accommodation specialist meeting is what we call it, where they determine appropriate accommodations and really have that one-on-one connection that Nico was talking about. So this is a time for students to come in and explain what's going on with them. Maybe they had a 504 plan in high school or an IEP that they just want to bring into the college environment, or maybe they're just realizing they have a disability. Maybe they have never used services before, but they're noticing that, they're struggling in this area or they're struggling in that area, and it was suggested to them that they meet with our office. So we really just invite students in to connect with us as soon as they're starting to have those questions, or you have provided them with the insight that we're here, and the accommodation specialist will work with the students to determine the accommodations. From there, once accommodations are set up, students are provided accommodation letters, and we send those out to faculty. Accommodation letters are not retroactive, and that's a super important thing to note. If you are receiving an accommodation letter in the middle of the semester, it does not pertain to everything prior to that. So accommodations start the moment you receive that accommodation letter, and that's why we really encourage students to meet with us at the beginning of the semester to start that conversation. But again, it's a journey, and not everybody knows where they're at in that process, and so it's important that we meet with them when they are ready. Most accommodations are extra time for exams and quizzes, so time and a half or double time, and you might see that a lot. That could be a quiet location for exams and quizzes, so they might come to our office to take that exam with us in a room alone, or a small conference room. Accessible text, which is Nico's area, is very important. Access to PowerPoint slides prior to class could be an accommodation. A paid note taker, as Nico said, and then short extensions on assignments. And this is something that we know has a lot of questions involved, but our accommodation specialists are really willing to work with you to help figure out what works best for your class while supporting the student. So, Nico's going to take over on this one.
And so now just a little bit about in-person, hybrid, and virtual accommodations. So this fall semester, assuming things go the way they've been planned, most classes will be in person. But accommodations will still be in place for all forms of classes. So whether those are online, in person, or hybrid, students will always need to connect with the Student Disability Center to start that accommodation process. Students who are in in-person classes will be able to utilize the Alternative Testing Center in person. That will be fully open this coming semester. We do have some faculty resources available. So we have a faculty accommodation guidebook. So that talks about a little bit more of our processes around the fall semester and any questions you might have. Something that might come up as well is students who may need virtual access for accommodations. And that may be to some documented disability they have, or some barrier to the environment that keeps them from coming to class, such as a chronic health condition or something that leaves them immunocompromised. And then we also have a link on the PowerPoint for that virtual access for those procedures that you're welcome to look at. They go into great depth about what that process looks like and what are the best resources for you. Also important to note, as I said earlier, SDC is here to help guarantee access, not success. Just because a student receives accommodations does not mean that they will succeed in the course. That just, the access that we provide them simply provides them with that equity. Appropriate accommodations do not include substituting courses, changing or lowering the expectations for students with disabilities. And then some things that students are responsible for include their own personal services, so such as finding, hiring a personal aide, personal tutoring. There are many resources available, such as TILT or the Native American Cultural Center for personal tutoring or group tutoring, transportation to and from campus, and then getting food in the dining halls is also considered a personal service. And lastly, this is something we run into often. Difficulty with English is not considered a disability, so that's not something we would provide necessarily an accommodation for.
So a little bit about exams and exam scheduling. The first step that students must do is connect with our office. So they do need to set up those accommodations each semester. So whether that's their initial appointment with one of our accommodation specialists or renewal of those accommodations, they do need to do that each semester, and letters will need to be sent to instructors. Once letters are provided to instructors, students have access to schedule exams through our office. We do ask that they schedule that on our website, which is www.disabilitycenter.colostate.edu, and they need to do that 7 days in advance. Or they can connect directly with me to schedule those exams. Sometimes we know that students are just trying to figure it all out and get back into the groove. So we do have a 3-strike policy where we'll schedule exams late for students up to 3 times. And then from there, we really work with them to try and figure out how we can get all their exams scheduled at once. They have the option to schedule everything as soon as they get it. And sometimes it's hard to get into that groove. So we work with them to figure that out. Once you've received an email from the SDC, which will be about 6 days before your exam, letting you know that students are scheduled. So then what happens? That email will have some information about who is scheduled for your exams, the students that are planning on taking it with us. It'll also provide you the date and time of the exam, and it will provide you a link to upload and walk through some other additional information that we ask so we're proctoring your exam correctly. And there is a little link that says upload an exam on this slide and also on our website where all that information is accessible and available. Some important things to note: students are not required to take their exam with us, even if they present you with an accommodation letter. It could be that they want to get their accommodations in place, but they're really feeling comfortable in your class and don't feel like they need to use their accommodations, which is awesome. They don't have to. And so we just like to note that they may not be coming to our office to take it. They might be taking it in the classroom with the same amount of time and the same situation that everyone else is in the class. They may not be using those accommodations. When they come into our office, we do ask to see an ID. We also watch them put their phone in their backpack, and they need to show us all of the stuff that they are bringing in. So pencils and any scratch paper they want to bring in. If they're approved for certain items, say your class allows note cards or something, they have to show us that as well. We look at everything before it goes into the room with the student. The students are monitored via camera. We have cameras in each of our testing room, and so that is really helpful. But we also have an in-person proctor who is available and monitoring those cameras along with myself and my testing assistant. So we're really trying to ensure academic integrity when students are taking exams with us. And then if we're proctoring a virtual exam for a student, say they have assistive technology, your course uses Canvas exams, and it's just not jiving with the assistive technology, which does happen. We, in some cases, will proctor virtual exams for students. We move through that same check-in process with them. We ask to see an ID. We watch their phone being physically turned off, placed out of reach. We go through that whole check-in. They show us their environment, and then they also have to share their screen with us so that we can see they're not browsing. The virtual world is new and still we're learning a lot, so we're constantly updating and really tweaking this policy, but so far it's worked pretty well. Students taking exams on the assistive or in the alternative testing center have the option to use assistive technology, so that's an option there, but it is important to know that all of our computers are locked from the internet and all they can reach is Canvas. So I think we get that question a lot, is can they browse on our computers? No, they cannot. They can only reach Canvas for their exams, and we're continually checking that to make sure that hasn't changed. For more information about proctoring exams, you can check out the faculty guidebook page, and there's a lot of information there. And as always, I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you're having issues uploading, please reach out. I'm here to support you. And then this is just a little bit about putting accommodations into Canvas. So we get asked a lot if accommodations can go in Canvas. Yes, they can to an extent. One of the biggest accommodations we see, as Nico and I mentioned, is the extended time, and students taking exams on Canvas are able to have that extended time added, but You as the faculty member will need to be the ones to add that for the student. Unfortunately, I don't have access to all of the courses on campus, so I can't do that. But it's a pretty straightforward process. We have information on how to do that on our faculty guidebook page. It's also important to note that Respondus and HonorLock support the extended time accommodation. So if you're using Respondus or HonorLock for your courses, you can definitely still add that extended time. And we're happy to work with you on other accommodations. So if there's more than just that extended time accommodations, in a lot of cases, HonorLock and Respondus will still be able to work for that student. We might just have to kind of move through that process a little bit. And then for questions about removing Respondus or HonorLock, so for example, we need to virtual proctor or the student needs to take the exam through SDC using assistive technology, you can connect with me directly and I'm happy to provide that support. And if I can't do it, I will put you in contact with somebody who knows a lot more about Canvas than I do. And so again, I'm just happy to answer questions. That's kind of what I love questions. I tell this to my student staff all the time. Please ask me questions. So if you're ever experiencing an issue related to testing, please let me know. And if I don't know the answer, I will make sure to send you to somebody who does.
So in terms of the accessible text accommodations we provide, I am the coordinator of accessible text, so this is kind of my area of expertise. So the process of receiving the accommodation for accessible text, the student will indicate a desire to the SDC specialist or a need for digital access for their course textbooks or other course materials. The Assistive Technology Resource Center will receive a referral from the SDC accommodation specialist. And then the ATRC will go through an assessment with the student to determine what their assistive technology needs are, what kind of assistive technology they'll need on their personal devices, what kind of formats in terms of documents work best for them. And then once they've had that assessment with the Assistive Technology Resource Center, that's when they'll come back to me and I will begin the conversion process of their required textbooks for their courses. That is I would say that it's about a 2-week turnaround in terms of getting textbooks converted into a digital format. So in terms of course materials, this is something I also work on with faculty. So we always say that building accessibility into your documents as you create them is less time consuming than going back to documents that you've already uploaded and retroactively making them accessible. So we are committed to being proactive rather than reactive in improving access to those electronic course materials. Some of the examples of course materials may include Word documents, PDFs, PowerPoints that are uploaded into Canvas, electronic textbooks, so particularly inclusive access textbooks are becoming much more common. And we definitely suggest that if you have the ability to use inclusive access books for your courses, that you do that, because those are accessible to 95% or more of students with disabilities. It's often only a small percentage, such as maybe someone with a visual impairment, that might not be accessible. And lastly, electronic syllabi, quizzes, exams, or homework that might be in Canvas are examples of course materials that would need to be made accessible. So again, electronic accessibility includes are accessed using a wide variety of devices and software. So that could be mobile devices, text-to-speech software, which is provided by the ATRC, voice recognition software. And then the question gets asked often, can a wide variety of technologies interact with electronic content? And often the answer is not automatically. So the content must be specifically designed to work with the technology. And I'll go over a few examples here in a minute of how to make those, make that content more accessible. So, and lastly, adding steps to your workflow. So working proactively when you create documents to make those more accessible is easier than having to go fix a problem after the documents have already been created. So just some easy tips for creating accessible documents, and I'll go into a little bit more detail here in a second. So the big ones are making scanned PDFs searchable. So text in a document can be highlighted and searched, and that's an example of a searchable PDF. Using headings in Word. So headings create a hierarchy between and within paragraphs that make the document easier to navigate, and that's especially true in documents that are fairly long. Adding captions to videos is very important, and then checking the reading order for PowerPoints. So a correct reading order will make it possible for screen readers to correctly read the documents. And so looking at PDF documents, I have two documents on the PowerPoint, one on the left and one on the right. And when looking at a document, which article would you say is accessible? So the one on the left shows the text highlighted, but it's the individual text isn't highlighted, so it's just a text box. So the document on the left is an example of one that would not be accessible. Another way to check whether a PDF is accessible is to try and search through the document for a particular word. So that's common using the Control F function on a keyboard. If you are able to search for a word, that's an indication that it is accessible. If you're not able to search for a word, that's often an indication that it's not accessible and that it's just that it's hasn't been properly made accessible. In the top right document, you can see that when you select the words, they are individually highlighted. And that is, I think, the easiest indication of seeing that a PDF document is accessible. And the process for creating an accessible PDF, so this is the most basic step to be able to take to make an accessible PDF. So one of the biggest barriers to PDF accessibilities occurs with image-only documents. So think of a PDF that you simply scan into a Xerox or your scanner. An image-only PDF contains no actual text. It's just an image of text. So software such as Adobe Acrobat Professional can take an image-only PDF and convert it to a searchable document using a process called optical character recognition or text recognition. The resulting document, once it's been saved, creates a document that can interact with varying technologies. So just as an example, I have a couple of images of a document pulled up in Adobe DC, which I think is available to anyone on campus. So any faculty or staff have Adobe DC available. So we have 3 simple steps to be able to make a PDF document accessible using optical character recognition. So the first step that you'd want to take is seen next to the number 1. So what you would do is you would add the scan and OCR to the toolbar and then select this option. The next thing that will happen is under recognized text, which I have highlighted next to the number 2. You will choose either in this file, which processes one file. And then what's nice is if you select in multiple files, you can OCR multiple PDFs at the same time. So that makes it a lot quicker if you have a bunch of PDFs that you need to make accessible. And then the last step prior to saving would be, as you can see on the right side, I have the number 3 pointing to the blue recognize text button. And when you click that, it'll process the document, making it accessible. And then once that process is done, you always want to make sure to save the document. So in terms of Word accessibility, because this is another common document format we see, there are mostly 2 steps you want to take to making sure that Word documents are accessible. So the first would be to to create alt text for images. Alt text provides a textual alternative to visual information. So someone who is blind would be able to see the image, but if there's alt text provided, their screen reader will provide that alt text for them. And then the second, and then just to be able to create that in alt text, all you do is you right
Nico, I think we lost you. Are you still there? I think we lost Nico. He had our PowerPoint too, so I'm very sorry. I'm sure he's going to be joining back in quickly. I apologize for that. Is there any questions I can answer right now? We're going to be talking just a minute about service animals and kind of what that looks like, but I'd be happy to answer questions while we're waiting for Nico to join. Hi there.
I have a question.
I'm ready.
So I was trying to follow along with what Nico had said, and I had a Adobe Pro DC document up at the same time. And so I want to ensure that both my PDFs and Words are doing what he's recommended. If we need, are we able to schedule an appointment with him if to help go through those steps one more time, or how should we do that?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. We're always happy to send out this PowerPoint so we're happy to share all this information, but Nico is also happy to help, whether that be an appointment or an email or whatever easiest for you. The Assistive Technology Resource Center is also fantastic, and they support faculty with PDF and Word creation as well to make sure they're accessible. So they're also a fantastic resource for faculty and staff on campus. So that will be another option as well.
And so will you type that into the chat?
I would be happy to.
Thanks.
Of course. And then I also saw that there's a question about when the recording of the session will be emailed out. I am not sure who the recording goes to. I don't know if it stays in this chat or if it goes to Deb, who is organizing this for Tilt. So I'll make sure that I find that out and make sure she knows folks would like it. But if you are interested in the recording, I would be happy to send it out to you as soon as I have it back. And you can just put your name in the chat, or if you want to email me, either way, I'm happy to send that out as well, along with the PowerPoint slides, if that would be helpful. And then I have the presentation kind of pulled up where we were, so I can definitely send it to you. I'll finish up where we were and then continue to ask if anybody has more questions. I am not as well versed on the Word accessibility as Nico is, so I probably won't be able to give you as much of that context as he was, but let me at least finish up where we were. So give me just 1 minute, and then we can kind of ask more questions. As I said, I love questions, so let me see. All right. So we were here. Here's a little bit more about Word accessibility. I think Nico was also going to explain the headings, which are really important, as he mentioned, for accessibility purposes. Adding headings of any kind into your Word document is really crucial when looking for a screen reader. You can do that by just going up to that little button at the top that says styles and adding headings. And that could be like a main heading and then a subheading. I do that a lot in my my documents. And then generating a table of contents for folks to go back to and connect with is also very important. So moving on, and I will have Nico connect with anyone who is interested. We're happy to have this conversation further. So we'll make sure you get that information again. And collaboration, we're all about collaboration. So Nico would very much shout out the ATRC, the Assistive Technology Resource Center. They're here to help. There's some detailed tutorials on how to do that, accessibility by design. They've created some great information, so I'll make sure to send out this PowerPoint. And you can also connect in with Nico. As I mentioned, he's happy to help out as he can as well. So a little bit about service dogs. I think we have 4 more slides left, and we're going to be talking a little bit about service dogs and service animals. There is a difference between service dogs and an emotional support animal. Service dogs are working animals and not pets. They perform a specific task to support their owner. They can be miniature horses. We've not seen miniature horses on campus, but it's usually either a dog or a miniature horse. And then they have been trained to provide a service for a person with a disability. Dogs or other animals whose sole function is to provide comfort or emotional support do not qualify as service animals under the ADA. So we have a lot of students that come into the dorms and residence halls who bring emotional support animals, and that is completely different than a service animal or a service dog. I apologize. We have these nice brochures that we created a few years ago that kind of speak to the difference between service dogs and emotional support animals, and you'll see that across campus. Emotional support animals can be a wide variety of pets, but they're really there to support students emotionally, and with mental health and all the things that emotional support animals do, but they can't come to class. They can't be at the Lori Student Center, for example. They need to remain in the residence hall, and really that is their location. And they do need to have approval from our office first before that they can, students need to have approval from our office first before they can bring emotional support animals to campus. Service dogs, that's not the case. Service dogs are a tool for someone with a disability, and so it changes a little bit, but they are allowed in most public places and educational areas. There are some specific rules related to service dogs, and so when it's not obvious what a service dog is providing for the individual, staff may ask 2 questions, and these are from the ADA, and we support you asking this if there's questions about the service dog in the classroom. And those 2 questions are, is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? So that's the first question you can ask. And the second is, what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? You can't ask to see the task being performed. You can't ask that they show you anything. These are the only 2 questions that you can ask as a staff member. You can't ask about the person's disability. You can't require medical documentation or an identification card. And you may not have them demonstrate the ability to perform that work or task. We do have a policy regarding service and emotional support animals. I would recommend checking it out, and I'll make sure this slide goes out as well so you all can check in with that. We have updated this and worked with many folks across campus to ensure that this is up to date. And it's something else to note about service animals. If you are noticing that you have an animal in your classroom, they are not acting like a service animal, for example, they are barking repeatedly in class, they are not listening to their handler, they are going to the bathroom in the classroom, or there is clear neglect of that animal, please reach out to us or reach out to CSU PD. We are both here to support you all in the classroom too, and service animals should really be listening to their handlers, should be pretty quiet during class. So if you're continually having a service animal being brought in who is disruptive and not really acting like a service animal, please let us know. We're happy to reach out to the student and try to figure out what's happening there. So that's the end of our presentation. I don't know if there's any more questions or if I can answer any things that are coming up, and I'll stop sharing my screen. So
I just had one question in relation to what was just presented, and you had mentioned that the ESAs are not allowed on campus and in classrooms.
they're allowed on campus in the dorms and residence halls, but they need to be approved by the SDC. And we go through a full process of how the student can bring them into the dorms or residence halls. We let them know where they can and cannot take them. We encourage students not to, for example, walk dogs across campus because there might be service dogs who are actually working, and that can be really disruptive. The Oval, though, is a place where anyone can bring their dog. That's kind of a free zone, as we like to call it. So folks can go on campus, but we encourage that those animals are not, in those other public spaces across campus, and they should not be going into the LSC or the classrooms or offices.
And so, what is your guidance for instructors who are pulled aside by students and identify to say, I have an ESA, is it okay for me to bring this animal into class with me? And then ultimately, I think, put it on the instructor to make a call of whether their comfort level is not. So I'm just wondering, what is your guidance as far as when instructors are personally pulled aside based off of the level of the student's comfort and also the other students within the classroom?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's totally appropriate to say, no, they can't bring it to class. That's kind of our guidance is if they are insistent that they would really like that service animal in the classroom or ESA, I should say ESA, in the classroom with them, they need to reach out to our office because maybe that is an accommodation that would go above just an ESA. Maybe they do need to look at getting a service animal like a dog to go to class with them because there is something else happening. So I think we would recommend in general saying no, because if there is actually a service dog in the classroom and then we have an ESA, it can cause a lot of friction and issues for you as a teacher. It can be disruptive for the class, and it's really harmful for the handler who's using that service animal for their disability if they're all of a sudden distracted and pulled out because this ESA is being disruptive and not doing the things they're supposed to be doing. So I would always recommend saying no, but then suggesting they reach out to our office because maybe we support them in looking for, a service dog type solution instead of an ESA.
And your office provides accommodation correspondence to the instructors when a service animal has been approved?
So we do not do that for service dogs. Service dogs are different under the ADA. If a student can come to campus with a service dog and they don't have to register with us because it is part of their disability. So that's only for ESAs, and that's where it gets a little tricky. So if there's ever questions, we always recommend reach out to us and we'll kind of do that legwork on what we're allowed to do. So that's not on you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I do see in the chat that there is a question about a colleague or department head bringing a dog to their office and keeping behind closed doors. Technically, if it's not a service dog, they should not be bringing it onto campus. And that's something we kind of are trying to spread as much as possible. I know it's always fun to have animals in the office sometimes, or seeing pets and getting to bring them in. But that is something we really discourage because it can disrupt folks who actually have a service dog who they need for support. So as far as how, I'm not sure who you would go to on that, but I am happy to check in with my supervisor and see what recommendations they have and connect back in with you. Are there any other questions I can answer? Yes, you're welcome. I'm happy to do that. And it looks like we might have one more person typing something in the chat, but maybe not. Oh, just a thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I know we lost Nico. I just got a message from him saying his internet went out. So he's very sorry he had to leave and would like to apologize to y'all, but we'll make sure that we have sent out those PowerPoint slides and get a copy of this sent to y'all. I really appreciate you being here. And please, if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, to Nico, or just to the office, and we're happy to answer those for you.